Check the time. Wherever you are right now, your watch and your neighbors say the same thing. That's normal. That's how a place built to human scale works. Now picture a territory 5 times too wide for that. In the west, on the Tibetan Plateau, higher than any mountain in the lower 48 states, a yak herder drives his animals toward a barley pasture through a light that has only just been born. The sun is rising. His day is beginning. More than 3,000 miles east, a whole skyline rises out of a sea of clouds. Shanghai, where night has already fallen and millions of windows are blinking awake. 2 climates, 2 altitudes, 2 centuries almost separated by a single border, the edge of the same flag. And yet, if the herder and the Shanghai city dweller checked their watches at this exact moment, both would read the same hour. Because this territory, from the frozen desert of the north to the flooded rice fields of the south, runs on a single time zone. 1 official hour for a country that spans 5. In Kashgar, out in the far west, the sun doesn't climb to noon until around 3 in the afternoon by the clock. This is the largest country on Earth to run on a single clock, while the United States, nearly the same size, keeps 4. 1 continent, 1 clock. That's the first clue. The first sign that the word we use to name this place hides something far larger than a country. For the next hour, we won't be visiting a nation. We'll be crossing a continent wearing the mask of a country. A place where you can travel in a single day by train, from permafrost to jungle, from one language to another, from one world to another. And one question will follow us from the first frame to the last. Just one. How can a single name hold this many worlds that on the face of it have no business belonging together? What holds all of this up? Let's start with the highest. In the west lies the Tibetan Plateau, what the maps call a plateau, but which is the size of Western Europe. They named it the roof of the world, and that's not travel brochure language. It averages nearly 15,000 feet, higher than the tallest peak in the lower 48 states. Up here, the air carries only about 14% oxygen, against 21% at sea level. The body feels it on the first step. The breath shortens, the temples tighten, the smallest effort costs double. At this altitude, space isn't measured in miles, but in silences. Lakes of a blue that shouldn't exist sleep between mountains with no names. Herds of yak push against a wind that hasn't met an obstacle in hundreds of miles. And the people here didn't simply get used to that thin air. Their bodies changed. Over thousands of years, their blood learned to carry oxygen more efficiently than ours. Tibetans carry dozens of genetic adaptations, found nowhere else on Earth. It's one of the rare places where you can read evolution still at work in a living people. You see it in the children. Where a visitor from the lowlands stops, bent double, lungs on fire, a plateau child scrambles up the trail without a thought, laughing as if the air were enough. Because for him it is. What his body does without effort, ours will never learn. Nothing here matches the idea you carry of this place. No crowds, no neon, no speed. Only altitude, barley, prayer, and the cold that drops the instant the sun tips over. Look closely at this landscape. Keep it with you, because in a few minutes we'll be somewhere so different you'll struggle to believe it shares the same map, the same country, almost another planet. Come down from these summits, but don't go looking for warmth yet. Far in the northeast, against the Russian border, lies Heilongjiang, and it's locked in ice. Here, winter doesn't visit. It moves in for months, with a cold that rivals neighboring Siberia. The Amur River freezes solid, hard enough to walk across. The forest sheathes itself in frost that turns every branch to white glass. Breath freezes leaving the mouth, eyelashes turn white. And people live in it anyway. They work, they queue, they walk the kids home from school in a cold that anywhere else would empty a city. It's on the banks of that frozen Amur, in the city of Haihe, that an invisible line begins. One we'll come back to. Remember the name? Haihe. Because here's what to hold on to. While the Amur sleeps under ice, at the other end of the same territory, farmers are planting rice barefoot in warm water under a damp sun. The same day, the same country, the same hour on the clock. Two winters don't look alike from one end of this land to the other, because at one end there's no winter at all. So a question rises. If the north freezes and the south sweats, if the west gasps for air at altitude and all of it holds under a single name, then where in all this do people actually live? Let's head back inland, and the landscape empties out, further still. The plateau and the frozen forest give way to the Gobi Desert. A desert of stone and sand so vast no image can hold it. For centuries, this emptiness wasn't an obstacle. It was a road, the Silk Road. More than 2,000 years ago, silk, jade, and ideas crossed these expanses on camelback, tying this empire all the way to Rome. Oases became cities. One of them, Loulan, thrived on the shore of a desert lake. Then the sand took it back entirely, and for centuries no one knew where it was. It was finally found, a dead city, mummified by drought, in the middle of nothing. The silence here is total. And it's that silence that raises an uncomfortable question. Because if a vast share of this country looks like this, empty, arid, barely livable, then where did its people go? A country famous for its crowds, and in front of us, desert as far as the eye can see. The answer comes down to a single line, and it has a name, the Hu Line. A geographer, Yuanyang, drew it nearly a century ago. One diagonal from Hangzhou, the frozen northern city we just left, down to Chongqing in the far south near Myanmar. A single stroke cutting the country in two. On one side, 57% of the territory. Deserts, plateaus, mountains, frozen forests. On the other, the rest. And here's what defies common sense. On the smaller half, 43% of the land, live 94% of all Chinese. Almost everyone on one side of a line nobody drew on the ground. Almost no one on the other, since who traced it, despite the population explosion, despite the largest migrations in human history, that line has barely moved. From space, at night, it jumps out at you. To the east, a carpet of light. To the west, the dark. One name and two halves that never meet. Keep that line in view. Much later, we'll understand what it really hides. A quick pause before we continue. My name's James. Together with the team, we make documentaries about travel and the world's most beautiful destinations. The famous ones and the ones you'd never expect. We're still just getting started, so every subscriber truly matters. If this kind of film speaks to you, subscribing is all it takes. It's free and it makes all the difference for us. Thanks, and let's get back to it. Cross the Hu line, move to the full side, and all at once, everything starts to breathe. Drop down into Yunnan, in the far south. The air is warm, heavy, soaked with water. The mountain is no longer bare, it's carved. At Yuanyang, the Hani people cut the slopes into rice terraces over more than 1,000 years. Staircases of water descending hundreds of feet. At dawn, when the mist clings between the flooded steps, you can't tell where the sky ends and its reflection begins. And the south hides another invisible line, as stubborn as Hu's. Here, they don't eat like the north. Up there beyond the Huai River, the land gives wheat. The noodles, the flatbread, the steamed bun. Here, it gives rice, field after field. Two halves of the same country that forever have not put the same thing in the bowl. You think you know Chinese food. It doesn't exist. There are 8 great schools of it, from the fire of Sichuan to the sweetness of Canton, and some don't recognize each other. Because this corner of the map hides, above all, a density that the word China crushes the moment you say it from far away. Officially, this country recognizes 56 peoples. 56, each with its language, its festivals, its clothes. In some valleys of Yunnan, you only have to cross a ridge to change language, belief, and face. Take Yunnan. In its southern valleys live the Dai, whose new year is a giant water fight. For 3 days, people drench each other in the streets because the water washes off the old year and carries luck into the next. Farther north, near Lake Lugu, the Mosuo are counted among the last matrilineal societies on Earth. The house, the land, and the name passed down through the women, and the husband comes only at night. 2 peoples, 2 worlds, a few hundred miles apart, and both On paper, simply Chinese. From far off, we say the Chinese, the way we'd say the Europeans. But no one confuses a Portuguese with a Finn. Here, the mask is simply more effective. One word, and all that mosaic vanishes under a smooth surface. This is the heart of the paradox. The closer you get, the more the unity cracks. One country, one map, one color, and underneath, a diversity so dense it should, by all logic, tear the whole thing apart. So, why doesn't it? Keep the question open and let the landscape answer. At Guilin, the earth does something unbelievable. Along the Li River, limestone towers erupt from the ground by the hundreds, round and green, seeming to float above the rice fields. Farther north, at Zhangjiajie, thousands of sandstone pillars climb straight toward the sky, some more than 1,000 feet, crowned with pines, wrapped in mist. This isn't a landscape you cross. It's a landscape you can't quite believe. So much so that Hollywood came here for the floating mountains of Avatar. And for 2,000 years, Chinese painters depicted exactly those mountains. Floating, unreal, half erased into the void. People long took it for a style, a way of stylizing the real. Then you come to Guilin, and you understand. They weren't stylizing anything. They were painting what they had in front of them. At Guilin, the water made these towers. Drop by drop, it dissolved the soft limestone over millions of years and left standing only the hardest stone. The south is a slow sculpture, carved by patience. Another world, another China. And we haven't even reached the halfway point of the journey. There is, farther east, a mountain China has never stopped contemplating. They call it Huangshan, the Yellow Mountain. Its granite peaks pierce a sea of clouds that rises and falls with the day. In the morning, the summits float like islands on a white ocean. By midday, the sea withdraws and uncovers the drops. Pines, several centuries old, cling to the bare rock, twisted by the wind into shapes no gardener would dare invent. To the south, on the Leash River, an old fisherman poles his bamboo raft through the same mist, his cormorants perched at the bow. Once the bird would dive, seize the fish, a ring around its neck keeping it from swallowing. The man would take it back from the beak. Today, this fishing feeds almost no one. It's kept alive for the beauty of the gesture, for memory, for the rare eyes that still come to watch it. But the image itself has stayed exactly the same. They call them the Four Wonders of Huangshan. The sea of clouds, the hot springs, the pines gripping the rock, and the stones in impossible shapes. To reach the summits, there's only one way. Tens of thousands of steps cut by hand into the granite. And every day, before the visitors, porters climb them, a long bamboo pole across their shoulders, loaded with food, bottles of water, sometimes bags of cement, to resupply the inns perched up top. The same bent back as in the rice field, but vertical in the clouds. Every night, thousands of hikers climb in the dark to reach the summit by dawn. Not for the view, but for the exact moment the sun spills over and sets the sea of clouds on fire. They come to watch a sunrise the way others go on pilgrimage. Maybe that's the real secret of these floating mountains. They aren't only a landscape. They're the image this place holds of itself, the quiet, misted, suspended dream that a whole civilization reached toward with the brush for centuries. A country can be immense, loud, bristling with cranes and towers. Deep down, it dreams of itself as a silent summit emerging from the clouds. In every station in this land, from the frozen platforms of Harbin to the humid terminals of Canton, the same clock shows the same time, all set to Beijing, all in agreement across thousands of miles of geographic disagreement. Stop on that detail because it changes everything. Until now, we've traveled like geographers. We looked at the land, the climate, the stone, the peoples, and we assumed this country's unity rose out of all that, out of the soil, out of chance. That's wrong. This unity wasn't born. It was built, decided. That single time zone isn't a quirk of nature. It's a decree. A little more than half a century ago, one man decided that from one end of the country to the other, every watch would tell Beijing time. Even in Kashgar, where noon then falls in the middle of the solar afternoon. They called it national unity. The mask wasn't placed by geography. It was placed by men. In Kashgar, a Uyghur family lives that gap every day. The shop doesn't open at 8, but at 10. Because at 8, the sun isn't up yet. They eat dinner at midnight by Beijing's clock, outside, in a light still golden. 2 hours between the time they read and the time they live, and they've learned to fold an entire day around that gap. It isn't the land that holds this country together. It's a choice, and the country makes it again at first light, every single day. Which leaves one thing to understand. How can a simple decision keep a continent from breaking apart? And the clock is only the quietest sign of that will. There are others, far older, far heavier. Walls, canals, ideas 3,000 years old. Because to hold a continent in one hand, decreeing the hour, isn't enough. You have to drag back together by force what geography took such pains to keep apart. Let's start with the most famous gesture and the most misunderstood. You were probably taught in school that it's the only human structure visible from space. That's false. No astronaut, from Apollo to the space station, has ever managed to make out the Great Wall with the naked eye. It's too narrow, barely the width of a house and the exact color of the Earth around it. The first Chinese sent into space looked for it through the window. He didn't see it. What's true, on the other hand, dwarfs the myth. End to end, with all its branches, the wall runs nearly 13,000 miles, enough to circle the United States more than once. Dozens of generations built it, stone after stone, packed earth after packed earth, along the northern ridges, over centuries. And it cost dearly. Soldiers were posted to it for life, in lost towers where the winter kills, Peasants were conscripted by the tens of thousands, and many never came back down. But the wall wasn't just a wall. It was also the country's oldest communication network, a chain of watchtowers where, as the enemy approached, they'd light a column of smoke by day, a fire by night. From tower to tower, the signal could cross hundreds of miles in a few hours, a message racing across the continent long before any telegraph. Yet here's what the wall really tells, and it has nothing to do with space. They raised it to keep the outside out, the horsemen of the steppes, the northern wind, the unknown world. And yet the real battle here was rarely fought there. The deadliest threats didn't come from outside, they came from within. Famines, floods, revolts, dynasties that rot and collapse in on themselves. The wall faces outward, immense, braced against the stranger, while the country, at its back, fights mostly against its own urge to fly apart. Come back down, far to the southwest, into the misted mountains of Sichuan. Here, the forest is no longer made of trees, but of bamboo, oceans of bamboo that ripple across the slopes at the faintest breath. And in that green silence lives the most famous animal on the planet, the giant panda. Fewer than 2,000 are left in the wild, and nearly 3/4 hide in these mountains alone. A bear that gave up meat to spend 14 hours a day chewing a giant grass that barely feeds it, a creature built for the hunt, reassigned as a vegetarian monk. It isn't alone up there. Above it, in the cold, the golden monkey with the blue face endures winters more than 20 below zero. Higher still prowls the snow leopard, almost impossible to catch sight of. 3 worlds stacked on a single slope, from warm bamboo to snow. And its life hangs by a green thread. Every few decades, the bamboo of an entire slope flowers all at once, then dies entirely. And the panda, unable to eat anything else, must flee the mountain or starve in the middle of what was, the day before, abundance. A female bears only 1 cub every 2 years, the size of a stick of butter, blind and pink, that she holds against her for months. A whole species suspended on a fickle grass, and a single mother at a time. That panda says nothing about geography or time. But it says this, quietly: a nation of more than 1 billion people, obsessed with speed and concrete, chose to keep, high in its mountains, a patch of untouched forest for a bear that's good for nothing, except to be loved by everyone. That too is a way of holding together. Around a single symbol, everyone decides together to protect. The country even turned that symbol into an ambassador. For decades, China has never sold its pandas. It lends them. Every panda in a foreign zoo, from Washington to Tokyo, stays Chinese property, loaned for a few years against a rent paid to Beijing. A short-sighted, clumsy bear has become one of the most effective diplomatic tools on the planet. Almost comic proof that here, even the wildlife serves the reach of the center. In a single generation, this nation laid the largest high-speed rail network ever built. more than 30,000 miles of track, more than the rest of the planet combined. The first stretch dates back barely more than 15 years. Today, China holds 2/3 of the world's high-speed rail. What once took several days by road is now done before noon. The Gobi and the rice fields of Yunnan, once a lifetime of walking apart, are linked by a train that runs at 200 miles an hour. And this is where the most unsettling image of the journey appears. Look through the window of one of these trains. In the foreground, a man works a rice paddy exactly as it was worked 1,000 years ago. Bent, barefoot in the mud, a buffalo for his only engine. And behind him, a few yards away, the fastest train in the world crosses the frame in a fraction of a second. Two eras in the same image, separated by the thickness of a pane of glass. Meanwhile, the cities rise. Chongqing, tucked inland, a single municipality the size of South Carolina, more than 30 million people, has become one of the largest cities on the planet, almost without the rest of the world noticing. Forests of towers where there were fields, bridges spanning gorges so deep you look for the river below and can't find it. And this nation doesn't just link its cities, it vaults over everything that separates them. Where a gorge opens, they throw a bridge across it. The highest road decks in the world are here, hung half a mile above the drop, so high the clouds sometimes pass beneath the roadway. In the south, a single sea bridge runs more than 30 miles to set 3 cities on the same road. What once took a day by ferry now takes minutes. A country, quite literally, knitting itself back together in concrete wherever geography had torn it apart. It's that raw energy that makes the place electric. This isn't a country that remembers. It's a country rewriting itself live, faster than the world can keep up. But before the first rail, long before, it had already linked its north and south with water. The Grand Canal, more than 1,100 miles dug by hand, from Beijing all the way to Hangzhou, the distance between New York and Florida. It's the longest man-made canal humanity has ever dug, and it's more than 2,000 years old. Why such madness? Because of one simple imbalance. Rice grew in the south, power, the armies, and the capital were in the north. The grain had to be moved up year after year to feed the center. So they carved a straight river across a continent, linked 5 river basins, including the Yellow River and the Yangtze. And for centuries, millions of tons of rice slid north along that vein of water, hauled by men and oxen on the banks. Look closely, because it's the same gesture as the train earlier. The high-speed train only redoes in steel and at 300 miles an hour what the canal was already doing at the speed of a barge, tearing the feeding south out of its isolation and wiring it to the commanding north. In this country, unity has always flowed from south to north, first in the water, now on the rail. And the canal isn't just a line on a map. Whole families were born, lived and died on it, on barges that scarcely touch land. They raise their children there, hang the laundry between 2 masts, fix a pot of flowers to the bow. To cross the high ground, the engineers of old invented pound locks centuries before Europe, lifting boats from one water level to the next like a liquid staircase. A continent we think of as flat, crossed clean through by a river that climbs and descends the hills. Two immense rivers come down from this country. The Yangtze, the longest in Asia, nearly 4,000 miles, crosses it west to east like an artery, carrying on its back an enormous share of everything made here. Cut it, and the machine stops. Along its banks stand cities the rest of the world has never heard named, each holding more people than Chicago or Los Angeles. River ports 1,000 miles from the sea, where cargo ships climb the current into the heart of the continent. The Yangtze Basin alone holds close to 1/3 of the country, hundreds of millions of lives hanging on a single river. But it's the other river that tells the country's deepest truth. The Yellow River, the Huanghe. They call it the Cradle. It was on its banks thousands of years ago that the civilization everything else descends from was born. It gave the land, the water, the first harvests, the first cities, the first kings. It gave everything. And it took everything back. Because the Yellow River carries a second name, far darker, China's sorrow. Because over the centuries, when it overflowed, it didn't overflow a little. It changed its bed outright, erasing entire provinces in a single motion of water. Some of its floods rank among the deadliest disasters humanity has ever known, of any kind at all. Here is the true fragility of this land, written in its mud. What gave it birth is also what can erase it. The hand that feeds and the hand that drowns are the same hand. The whole history of China can be read as a struggle against that paradox. Dikes, canals, all the way to the Three Gorges Dam, the largest structure of its kind in the world, outsized efforts to tame a water that gives life and rips it away in the same motion. That one dam drowned entire cities and displaced more than 1 million people. Whole towns swallowed, so the river would, at last, obey. They even moved entire temples, stone by stone, higher up the hills, to save them from the water they were deliberately raising. Forever, this place fights against its own geography, and it has never truly won. There's a moment every year when this entire continent moves at once. The new year approaches and something staggering happens. Over 40 days, the Chinese make close to 9 billion trips. 9 billion. It's the largest human migration on the planet, repeated every year, as if all of humanity took to the road, then took to it again. In the stations, workers head back to the village they haven't seen in 12 months. A bag on their back, a gift under their arm. A father drives for 2 days to park his car in front of his parents' house. Crowded trains split the night in every direction at once. Some take neither train nor plane. Every winter, tens of thousands of workers climb onto their scooters and ride hundreds of miles toward their village, bundled to the eyes against the cold. Forming on the roads of the south, a river of headlights that flows all night in the same direction. And for those few days, the movement reverses. Factory cities empty out, silent, while thousands of villages, nearly abandoned the rest of the year, light up all at once, full of voices, cousins, children, for the length of a meal. In the stations, the wait is measured in hours. People sleep on the floor, on spread newspapers, a child asleep on their lap, a tub of instant noodles steaming between their feet. Some will stand for 30 hours straight, packed into the corridors and even the toilets of the train, for a seat they couldn't book. And at the end, always the same scene. A door opening onto a village courtyard, an old mother who hasn't seen her son in a year, and the New Year meal that was waiting, kept warm. And yet all of them move in the same invisible direction, toward home, toward the hearth, the family, the village they came from. All year, the machine pulls people toward the cities. Then, for 40 days, an older force calls them back to where they started. Maybe that's where you see it best. This gravity that holds the country up. It isn't in the steel or in the decree. It's in the need to return. So let's take up the only question that matters, the one that's followed us since the first frame. What on earth can hold all this together? We've ruled out geography. It separates everything. We've ruled out climate, altitude, the table. And language. We've seen it. There are dozens. A man from Canton and a man from Beijing can pass each other and not understand a word the other says. Cantonese and Mandarin are as far apart to the ear as two foreign tongues. And yet, set the same sign in front of them, the same newspaper, and something extraordinary happens. They both read the same thing. Because in China, people don't necessarily share a spoken language, but they share a writing. The same characters, traced for more than 3,000 years, that each pronounces in his own way, but understands in the same way. The man from Canton and the man from Beijing, unable to exchange a word aloud, can write each other a whole sentence and understand it perfectly. And that link didn't happen on its own. For centuries, to serve the empire, you had to pass an exam. The same one in every province, built on the same texts, the same characters. A farmer's son from the south and a scholar's son from the north studied the same lines. In a written language no one really spoke, but everyone learned to trace. Writing didn't just unite the people, it manufactured, generation after generation, an elite that thought in the same signs from one end of the continent to the other. And that writing is vast. There are tens of thousands of characters. You need a few thousand to read a newspaper and a lifetime to master them all. Each is at once a sound, a meaning, and a drawing. So much so that calligraphy here is held to be an art as high as painting, and a single brushstroke, well made, can stand as a work in itself. An emperor could judge a man by his hand. Look at a character painted on a wall. It's not just a word, it's one of the rivets holding the continent together. Where speech divides, the sign gathers. One of the oldest bonds of unity ever invented, and it makes no sound at all. there's a first piece of the answer. What holds this country together in space isn't what people have under their feet. It's what they share at the tip of the brush. But the other half is still missing, the one that holds the country together in time. At the heart of Beijing stands a palace of 9,000 rooms, ringed by high purple walls, the Forbidden City. For centuries, a single man reigned there, and they called him the Son of Heaven. Because in this country, power rested on an idea, the mandate of heaven. Heaven grants a dynasty the right to rule, but only as long as it rules well. Let famines come, floods of the Yellow River, corruption, revolt, and they said heaven withdrew its mandate. The dynasty fell. Another rose, settled onto the same throne in the same palace. And the cycle began again, over and over, across thousands of years. And that cycle never truly broke. This land has fractured dozens of times into rival kingdoms, into wars that ran for generations, into stretches when 3 or 4 emperors each claimed heaven at once. Every time you'd have sworn it was over, that the continent would stay shattered, the way Europe stayed shattered after Rome. Every time it fused back. Not because one man willed it, but because no one, on either side of the break, ever stopped believing there was only one throne worth taking back. Here's the other half of the answer. Writing holds people together in space. The mandate of heaven holds them together in time. It's the idea that above every emperor, above every collapse, there is only one legitimate center, one throne that must be occupied. A country can break into pieces for a whole century. But as long as everyone keeps believing there's only one possible center, the pieces always end up gathering back to reclaim it. And here is the detail that changes how you read all the rest. Even the conquerors from elsewhere didn't destroy that center. They occupied it. The Mongol horsemen, then the Manchus, crossed the wall, toppled the dynasty in place, and sat down on the same throne. They took the same title of Son of Heaven, ruled from the same forbidden city, adopted the writing, the rites, the machinery of administration, and became, in their turn, Chinese emperors. The center was so strong, it ended up absorbing the very people who had conquered it. But at Yuanyang, on the Hani terraces, there are fewer and fewer hands. A grandmother still tends the water channels her own grandmother cut, step by step, as she has all her life. Her grandchildren are in Chongqing, in a tower, and won't come back to plant rice. The gesture 10 generations repeated may go out with the one that still holds it. Because holding the continent in one hand is never done for free. Every time you impose 1 hour, one language, one network on worlds that never asked for it, something is erased. Local languages die out one by one, replaced by the Mandarin of the center. Ways of living centuries old vanish in a single generation, swallowed by the rising cities. You can almost count them going out. Manchu, the language of the last emperors, has only a handful of fluent speakers left. Dozens of others, spoken in a single valley, will stop with the generation that carries them. Every winter, a village school closes for lack of children. Every spring, one more family shuts up the ancestral house and takes the train to the city. That's the tension at the heart of this place. The harder you squeeze to keep the unity, the more you crush the diversity that made the place rich in the first place. Everything you unify is a thing you rub out. The mask holds, but it flattens what it covers. And none of this is simple, black or white. The same machine that erases the particular is the one that pulled hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in a stretch of time no other country has ever matched. The same effort that flattens is the one that connects, that heals, that opens the land locked up. You don't get to keep only the half you like. That's the real question this continent poses. Not is it impressive? Of course it is. But this one, more uncomfortable. What are we willing to erase in order to hold together? So, one last time, let's return to the question we started with. What holds all of this up? Not geography, it separates the Tibetan Plateau from the Gobi from Yunnan, one bank of the Yellow River from the other. Not language, not climate, not blood. We've seen the mosaic of 56 peoples the word China covers. It's the rivets we ended up finding, one by one. The shared writing, which holds people together in space. The mandate of heaven, which holds them together in time. The canal and the rail, which stitch the south to the north. And that gravity we watched at work at New Year, when 9 billion trips pull a whole people back toward the same hearth. Each one brings things a little closer, but none alone is enough to build a continent. What holds, in the end, is an idea. The idea passed down across thousands of years that above all these differences, there is a single whole to which everyone belongs. An invisible gravity older than any empire that makes the pieces, after every collapse, every division, every flood of the Yellow River, always gather back around the same center. Picture, one final time, the yak herder high on the roof of the world in his early morning light. And the Shanghai city dweller, 3,000 miles away, in his night already fallen. Everything separates them, the altitude, the cold, the language, the century almost. And yet both their watches read, Beijing time. That's no accident. It's a decision kept every day to make worlds live together that had no reason to. A mask, yes, but a mask this country has worn so long it has become a real face. Maybe that's the one lesson this outsized place has to offer. We all believe that what unites us comes from the land, from blood, from chance. China proves the opposite. Holding together is never a natural state. It's a choice, begun again every morning at the same hour by a people who decided to show the rest of the world only a single face. We've just seen a continent so full it had to be forced into one name. A billion lives pulled together and made to keep the same hour. Next time, we go to the opposite kind of country, one so small and so scattered that most of it lives somewhere else entirely. A handful of volcanic islands flung into the Atlantic off the coast of West Africa. A nation where more of its people live abroad, in Lisbon, in Boston, in Rotterdam, than on the islands themselves. You can't hold a place like that together with a border or a clock or a decree, because the largest part of it is always over the horizon. And yet it holds, carried against all reason, by a music of longing that everyone who ever left still knows by heart. Where this continent forced a multitude into a single name, that place keeps a scattered people whole across an entire ocean, with almost nothing but a song. That country is Cape Verde. That's where we go next. Subscribe to keep discovering how people live at the edges of the world. We'll see you at the next edge of the map.